May 30th, 1921, Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's Memorial Day, and most stores downtown are closed. But Dick Rowland, a 19-year-old black shoe shiner, heads to work anyway. The parade traffic means good tips. At some point during the day, he needs to use the restroom. But this is 1921 Oklahoma. Jim Crow rules everything. Black people can't use the same bathrooms as white people. So Rowland walks to the Drexel building on South Main Street, takes the elevator to the top floor where there's a segregated colored bathroom. The elevator operator is a 17-year-old white woman named Sarah Page. What happens next is still unclear. The most accepted version? The old elevator lurches. Rowland loses his balance. He grabs Page's arm to steady himself. She screams. A white clerk hears it, rushes over, sees Rowland flee in the building. He calls the police and reports an assault. That's all it took. A stumble, a scream, a misunderstanding. And within 24 hours, one of the wealthiest black communities in America would be burned to the ground. Because what most people don't know is that before 1921, Tulsa's Greenwood district wasn't just another black neighborhood. It was Black Wall Street, one of the most prosperous African-American communities in the entire country. And what happened there wasn't just a riot. It was a massacre, an organized assault, a mass killing carried out by white mobs armed and deputized by local police with airplanes dropping incendiary bombs from above. This is the story the history books buried for almost 80 years. The story of the day the government helped burn down a black town from the sky. Let's go back to the beginning. To understand what was destroyed, you need to understand what Greenwood was. By 1921, the Greenwood district was home to about 10,000 black residents. It had over 190 businesses. We're talking hotels, restaurants, grocery stores, movie theaters, nightclubs, a hospital, a library, 2 newspapers, and offices for black doctors, dentists, and lawyers. On just one block, the 100 block of Greenwood Avenue, there were 4 hotels, 2 newspapers, 8 doctors, 7 barbers, 9 restaurants, and a half-dozen professional offices. The wealth was real, and it was visible. Take O.W. Gurley, who bought 40 acres in North Tulsa in 1906 and started selling land exclusively to other black people. He opened the first black-owned business in the area, a grocery store. By 1914, his net worth was around $150,000. That's roughly $3 million in today's money. By 1921, he owned over 100 properties and was worth between $500,000 and $1 million. Up to $13.6 million today. Then there was J.B. Stratford. He'd graduated from Indiana University with a law degree and moved to Greenwood to buy up vacant land, then sell it to black families and entrepreneurs. By 1921, he was one of the wealthiest black men in the country. He owned the Stratford Hotel, the finest hotel in Tulsa, period. John and Lula Williams owned a confectionery, a candy shop, and the Dreamland. Theater, a 750-seat movie theater that showed the latest films. Simon Barry ran a transportation network, car rides, a bus line that went downtown, even chartered private planes for oil barons flying into Tulsa. At the height of his success, Barry made $500 a day. That's over $7,000 in today's dollars per day. There were black surgeons like Dr. A.C. Jackson, who was so skilled that the Mayo Clinic endorsed him as one of the best surgeons in the country, regardless of race. Greenwood had its own economy. Because Tulsa was segregated, black residents couldn't shop in white-owned stores or live in white neighborhoods, so they built their own. They hired each other. They bought from each other. Money circulated within the community. Historians estimate that every dollar spent in Greenwood changed hands at least 36 times before leaving the district. That kind of economic multiplier is what creates generational wealth. And that's exactly what Greenwood was doing, building wealth, real, tangible generational wealth. In 1921 America, less than 60 years after slavery ended, and white Tulsa hated it. They hated seeing black people succeed. They hated that Greenwood was expanding its physical boundaries, starting to collide with white neighborhoods. There were reports of threatening letters sent to prominent black business leaders, demanding they stop overstepping into white areas. The resentment was thick. Tulsa itself was a tinderbox. The oil boom had made it one of the fastest-growing cities in America. But with that growth came violence. Crime was rampant. Lynchings were common. In August 1920, just 8 months before the massacre, a white mob lynched a white teenager named Roy Belton. They dragged him from his jail cell at the courthouse. The Tulsa police did nothing to stop it. So when Dick Rowland was arrested on May 31, 1921, everyone knew what was coming. The Tulsa Tribune, the afternoon newspaper, ran a sensational front-page story. The headline, "Nab Negro for Attacking Girl in Elevator." The story called Rowland Diamond Dick and claimed he had torn Page's clothes and scratched her face. None of that was true. But it didn't matter. The paper also allegedly ran an editorial titled "To Lynch Negro Tonight," though no verified copy has ever been found. Every original copy of that edition mysteriously disappeared. But people at the time reported seeing it, and newsboys sold papers on the street corners shouting, "A Negro assaults a white girl." By late afternoon, word of a planned lynching had spread through white Tulsa. Around 7:30 p.m., a white mob of several hundred people gathered outside the courthouse, where Dick Rowland was being held in a top-floor jail cell. Sheriff Willard McCullough wasn't going to let another lynching happen on his watch. He stationed armed deputies on the roof with rifles and shotguns. He disabled the elevator and barricaded the stairwell, giving orders to shoot any intruders on sight. For a few hours, it was a standoff. Then, around 9 p.m., a group of about 25 armed black men showed up at the courthouse. They were World War I veterans. They'd fought for this country. They'd earned their citizenship, and they sure as hell weren't going to stand by and watch a black teenager get lynched. They offered to help the sheriff protect Rowland. McCullough turned them down, told them to go home. The situation was under control. But back in Greenwood, rumors were flying. People heard the white mob was storming the courthouse. They heard Rowland was about to be lynched. So around 10 p.m., a larger group, about 75 armed black men, returned to the courthouse. By now, the white mob had grown to nearly 1,500 people. Many of them were armed, too. And here's where it gets critical. The Tulsa police didn't try to disperse the white mob. They didn't arrest anyone. Instead, they started deputizing white men, handing out weapons. According to eyewitnesses, police told the newly deputized mob to get a gun and get a nigger. Around 10 p.m., a white man approached one of the armed black men and tried to disarm him. There was a scuffle. A shot rang out. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted. The outnumbered black defenders retreated toward Greenwood, with white vigilantes chasing them. Carloads of armed white men started driving through black neighborhoods, firing shots at homes. An unarmed black man was shot and killed inside a downtown movie theater. By midnight, fires had been set along the edge of the Greenwood commercial district, and in all-night cafes across white Tulsa, men were organizing, planning, preparing for a dawn invasion. This wasn't spontaneous. This was coordinated. Around 5 a.m. on June 1st, Thousands of armed white men gathered at the edges of Greenwood. They had rifles, shotguns, at least one machine gun. And then, as the sun came up, they poured into the district. They went block by block, house by house, business by business, looting everything, stealing jewelry, furniture, cash, anything of value, then setting it all on fire. Eyewitnesses described white rioters breaking into homes and dragging black residents into the streets, shooting them on sight. Families hiding under tables while white men ransacked their homes, smashing pianos with axes, dousing furniture with kerosene, lighting matches. One survivor, Olivia Hooker, was 6 years old. She hid under the dining room table with her 4 siblings while her mother covered them with a tablecloth. She could hear white men destroying her sister's piano, her father's store, completely destroyed. Only a single safe left standing because it was too heavy to move or break. Her school was blown up with dynamite. Another survivor, Eldoris Makondichi, was 9. She remembered her mother frantically waking her, saying, "The white people are killing the colored people." She recalled airplanes raining down bullets and having no time to even get dressed. She saw women walking barefoot on the railroad tracks in their nightgowns. She hid in a chicken coop to escape machine gun fire. George Monroe was 5 years old. He watched people get shot, watched his own curtains catch fire, hid under a bed with his sister when a rioter stepped on his finger. His sister threw her hand over his mouth to muffle his scream. The violence was systematic, surgical. This wasn't chaos, it was ethnic cleansing. And then there were the airplanes. Multiple survivors reported seeing planes flying low over Greenwood. Some said they dropped incendiary devices, turpentine balls, fire bombs. Others saw people in the planes shooting down at the streets. The Chicago Defender, a black newspaper, reported that at dawn, airplanes from the local aviation field directed the movement of the attacking mob. At 6:15 a.m., the paper said, men in the planes dropped firebombs of turpentine or other flammable material. Now, here's the thing. Historians have debated for decades what role the airplanes actually played. There were only about 15 planes stored at local airfields in 1921. Military records show no U.S. military aircraft were involved, so these were private planes, possibly owned by oil companies. In October 1921, the Chicago Defender published a story claiming that Greenwood had been bombed under orders of prominent city officials. A supposed affidavit from a former Tulsa policeman named Van B. Hurley alleged there was a meeting between local aviators and officials before the attack, where they planned an aerial assault. That affidavit was never entered into court records. Van B. Hurley's existence has never been verified, but lawsuit documents from 1946 explicitly named the Sinclair Oil Company as providing airplanes to the city, with a police captain named J.R. Blaine personally dropping turpentine bombs on homes. Whether or not bombs were dropped, there's no question planes flew over Greenwood during the massacre. Historian Scott Ellsworth, who's studied this for decades, says, "There is no question that there were planes flying over Greenwood during the massacre. There is evidence of this from both the African American and white communities. But Greenwood was destroyed on the ground by a white mob. It was not destroyed from the air. So maybe the planes were used for reconnaissance. Maybe they dropped incendiary devices. Maybe they fired shots. We may never know for certain, but what we do know is this. The psychological terror of seeing airplanes overhead while your neighborhood burns is real. The fear that your own government, or at least powerful white citizens, had mobilized aviation technology against you is real, and that terror is part of the trauma. By 9:15 a.m. on June 1st, National Guard troops finally arrived. But by then, most of Greenwood was already destroyed. Over 35 city blocks, more than 200 homes, burned to the ground. Churches, schools, businesses, the hospital, the library, the Dreamland Theater, all of it gone. And here's the cruelest twist. When the National Guard arrived, they didn't arrest the white rioters. They rounded up black Tulsans. Over 6,000 black residents were detained, imprisoned at the convention hall and the fairgrounds. Some were held for as long as 8 days. They could only be released if a white person vouched for them, a white employer, a white citizen. If you didn't have a white sponsor, you stayed locked up. Meanwhile, white Tulsans walked through the smoldering ruins, picking through the ashes for valuables, taking whatever was left. The official death count was 36, 10 white, 20 black. But that number is a lie. The 2001 State Commission estimated between 100 and 300 people were killed, most of them black. Bodies were buried in mass graves, dumped in the Arkansas River, loaded onto trucks, and taken to unmarked locations. For decades, survivors spoke of mass graves around Tulsa. In 2020, the city finally started investigating. They found evidence of human remains at multiple sites. Dr. A.C. Jackson, the renowned black surgeon, was one of the confirmed dead. After tending to victims all night, he walked back to his home with his hands raised. 2 young white men shot him anyway. He died on his lawn. Property damage was estimated at $1.5 million in 1921. That's over $30 million today, likely a massive underestimate. Insurance companies refused to pay claims. They classified the event as a riot, not a massacre, which meant the policies didn't cover it. Convenient. The city offered no help. In fact, there were efforts to prevent rebuilding. City officials tried to rezone Greenwood to make it illegal to reconstruct. They wanted to turn the area into an industrial zone. But the people of Greenwood refused to leave. They rebuilt, with almost no outside help. The Red Cross provided some relief, but the bulk of the rebuilding came from the survivors themselves. By the end of 1921, hundreds of structures were rebuilt. By 1942, Greenwood had over 200 black-owned businesses again. But the wealth that was destroyed, the generational wealth, the property, the capital, it was never fully recovered. O.W. Gurley left Tulsa. So did J.B. Stratford. Both men lost their fortunes. Many families never reclaimed their land or their businesses. The trauma passed down through generations. And then for decades, the massacre was erased from history. It wasn't taught in schools. It wasn't in textbooks. Tulsa city officials, eager to protect the image of their booming oil city, suppressed the story. Documents disappeared. Newspaper archives went missing. Survivors were told not to talk about it. It wasn't until the late 1990s that Oklahoma finally formed a state commission to investigate. In 2001, the commission released its report, confirming that the massacre happened, that it was coordinated, and that city officials conspired with the white mob. The report recommended reparations for survivors. As of today, no reparations have been paid. A few survivors received small private donations in 2002, about $200 each. That's it. Dick Rowland, his charges were dropped in September 1921. Sarah Page sent a letter saying she didn't want to prosecute. Rowland disappeared. Some say he went to Kansas City, maybe later to the Pacific Northwest. One report claims he may have died in a wharf explosion in Oregon in the 1960s, but no one knows for sure. He just vanished. Sarah Page also disappeared. She married a man named Fred Voorhees and left Tulsa. She never spoke publicly about the massacre, not once. So why does this story matter? Because it's not ancient history. The last survivors of the Tulsa Race Massacre died just recently. Viola Ford Fletcher lived to be 111 years old. She died in November 2024. Leslie Benningfield Randall died in 2024 at age 109. These were people who lived through this, who watched their community burn, who spent their entire lives fighting for recognition, for justice, for reparations, and they died without getting it. And because what happened in Tulsa is part of a pattern, it wasn't the only mass racial violence in America. There was the Colfax Massacre in Louisiana in 1873, the Wilmington Massacre in North Carolina in 1898, the Red Summer of 1919, when white mobs attacked black communities across dozens of American cities. Black Wall Street was destroyed because it succeeded, because it proved that black people could build wealth, could create thriving communities, could compete economically with white America. And that success was unacceptable to white supremacy. So they burned it down. They killed the people. They erased the history. And for 80 years, they got away with it. But here's what they couldn't destroy: the memory. The stories passed down through families, the oral histories, the photographs the survivors kept, the determination to rebuild. Greenwood rose again, not to the same height, sure, but it rose because the people refused to be erased. Today, there's a memorial in Greenwood, the John Hope Franklin Reconciliation Park, named after the historian whose father survived the massacre. There's Greenwood Rising, a history center that tells the story of Black Wall Street and the massacre. And there's a growing movement for reparations, for acknowledgement, for justice. Because what happened in Tulsa wasn't a riot. It was a massacre, a domestic terrorist attack, an act of racial violence carried out with the complicity of the government, and it's time we called it what it was. On May 31st and June 1st, 1921, the government helped burn down a black town. They armed the mob. They deputized the killers. They looked the other way, and for 80 years they tried to bury the truth. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. The people of Greenwood made sure of that. You can click in these other videos if you like this one. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to the channel for more history documentaries.